The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. 10-year-old Lucas Holt sat at the plaintiff's table, staring down at his hands, bracing himself for yet another rejection. He had been through this before, too many times. Foster homes, court hearings, adults making decisions about his life without ever really seeing him. Then Judge Mark Randall stood up. Judges didn't stand in the middle of a hearing. They didn't break protocol. But when he spoke, his words sent a shockwave through the room. I want to adopt this boy. Every head turned. The attorneys froze. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. Judges weren't supposed to get involved. They were supposed to watch from a distance. But for the first time in his life, someone had stepped forward instead of stepping away. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the case of Lucas Holt was called. Judge Mark Randall adjusted his glasses and glanced at the documents before him. It was supposed to be a routine hearing, a simple legal matter concerning the placement of a foster child. But something about this case unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Lucas was just 10 years old, a thin boy with dark brown hair and weary eyes. He sat beside his lawyer at the plaintiff's table, clutching the armrest of his chair, his fingers curled tightly as if bracing for bad news. Across the room sat Mr. and Mrs. Sanderson, the foster parents who had originally agreed to adopt him. But now they wanted to return him to the system. The lawyer representing the Sandersons stood and cleared his throat. Your Honor, my clients took Lucas into their home with the best of intentions. However, they have found his behavior to be difficult. They believe it is in his best interest to be placed elsewhere. Judge Randall studied them carefully. He had seen many cases like this before, families who thought fostering a child was a simple act of charity, only to realize that a child with trauma wasn't as easy to care for as they had imagined. He turned his gaze to Lucas. The boy was looking down at his lap, his small hands now gripping his jeans instead of the chair. Mr. Sanderson, Judge Randall said, his voice calm but firm, have there been any allegations of violence, disobedience, or danger in your household? Mr. Sanderson hesitated. No, Your Honor. Nothing serious. But he struggles with attachment. He doesn't seem to bond with us, and we believe another family might be a better fit. Another rejection. Randall clenched his jaw. Lucas had been bounced from one foster home to another since he was 4 years old. Every time, he was told he wasn't the right fit. And now, yet again, the people who had promised to love him were giving up. He took a deep breath. So, what you're saying is, you've changed your minds? Mrs. Sanderson sat up straighter. Your Honor, we aren't bad people. We just think someone else would be better suited to care for him. Lucas didn't lift his head. He was used to this. Used to people deciding his fate without asking what he wanted. Used to being a problem no one wanted to solve. Judge Randall closed the file in front of him. He looked at Lucas again, really looked at him. The hollow expression, the slouched posture, the way he made himself small, as if expecting to be invisible. Randall had seen too many kids like him. And suddenly, something inside him snapped. He stood up from his chair, the room falling into stunned silence. Judges rarely stood unless exiting the courtroom. But Randall didn't care about tradition in that moment. He looked directly at Lucas, then turned to the Sandersons, the lawyers, the social workers, the clerks, everyone. Then he said something that made the entire courtroom freeze. I want to adopt this boy. The murmurs in the courtroom turned into gasps. Lucas's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. The attorneys exchanged stunned glances, and the Sandersons looked outright bewildered. Randall ignored them all. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, but his voice was steady. I will step down from this case if necessary. But I will not allow Lucas Holt to be abandoned again. I want to adopt him. For the first time in his life, Lucas wasn't invisible. For the first time, someone was fighting for him. The courtroom was completely silent. The weight of Judge Randall's words hung in the air, leaving everyone frozen in disbelief. Lucas blinked up at him, his mouth slightly open, as if trying to process whether he had really heard what he thought he had. The Sandersons' attorney was the first to break the silence. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. A judge cannot personally intervene in a case like this." Randall remained standing, his expression unwavering. "I am well aware of the legal implications," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Which is why, if necessary, I will recuse myself from this case. But my decision stands. I intend to adopt Lucas." A shocked murmur rippled through the room. The court clerk looked up from his notes, unsure whether to continue recording. Lucas sat motionless, staring at the judge with wide, unreadable eyes. The Sandersons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Sanderson cleared his throat. "Well, we didn't mean for all of this to happen. We just thought the system would find him another family, someone more equipped." Randall turned his sharp gaze toward them. "You mean someone who wouldn't be an inconvenience to you?" Mrs. Sanderson's face turned red. "That's not fair, Your Honor." "We tried." "But not hard enough," Randall interrupted. His voice wasn't angry, but there was a quiet disappointment in it that made the couple sink deeper into their chairs. "Lucas isn't a stray animal to be passed around. He's a child. A child who deserves someone who won't abandon him when things get hard." Lucas flinched slightly at the word abandon, but he still hadn't spoken. Randall turned to the social worker assigned to the case, Megan Calloway, who sat near the prosecution table, looking just as shocked as everyone else. "Miss Calloway, what would be the next steps if I were to formally apply for adoption?" Megan hesitated, clearly thrown off. "Well, Your Honor, you would have to go through the standard evaluation process. Background checks, home visits, psychological assessments. You know as well as anyone that the system doesn't allow for emotional decisions. The process would take months." "I understand," Randall replied without hesitation. "And I am willing to go through it, just like any other prospective parent." Lucas finally spoke, his voice so small that it barely carried across the room. "Why?" Randall looked down at him, his expression softening for the first time since he made his declaration. "Because you deserve better than this," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be in your shoes." Lucas's eyes flickered with something, confusion, maybe even a hint of hope, but he quickly looked away, staring down at the table again. Megan sighed, running a hand through her hair. "This is highly unconventional, Your Honor." "I never said I was conventional," Randall replied, offering a small, dry smile. The opposing attorney stood. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. You're a judge, not a foster parent. This case should be reassigned immediately." Randall nodded. "Then reassign it." A stunned pause followed. "I will recuse myself from this case effective immediately," he continued. "But I will not change my decision to apply for Lucas's adoption. I will go through the system like everyone else. If, after the evaluations, the state determines that I am unfit to be his guardian, I will accept that." Megan hesitated before nodding slowly. "If that's truly your decision, then I'll begin the necessary paperwork." Lucas looked back up at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. "You really mean it?" he asked in a whisper. Randall kneeled slightly so he was at the boy's eye level. "Yes, Lucas," he said gently. "I mean it." For the first time, Lucas didn't look away. For the first time, someone had chosen him. The ride back to the foster home was quiet. Lucas sat in the back seat of Megan Calloway's car, staring out the window, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing invisible patterns on the glass. His mind was still trying to catch up with what had happened in the courtroom. A judge, a man he had never even met before today, wanted to adopt him. It didn't make sense. People didn't just want kids like him. People tolerated him, put up with him until he became too much, and then they sent him away. That was how it always worked. Megan glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You okay, Lucas?" He shrugged but didn't answer. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel. When they arrived at the foster home, Megan walked him inside, nodding at the woman who ran the house. Mrs. Davis was kind enough, but Lucas had learned not to get attached. He never stayed anywhere long. Megan crouched in front of him near the doorway. "I know today was a lot to take in," she said gently. "I just want you to know that nothing is final yet. Judge Randall has to go through the whole process, just like any other parent. You don't have to make any decisions today, okay?" Lucas nodded, but deep down, he didn't believe it. This wouldn't last. It never did. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the moment when Judge Randall had stood up and said, "I want to adopt this boy." No one had ever said anything like that about him before. Usually, the conversation was about where to put him next, who would take him, not who wanted him. It had to be a mistake. Meanwhile, across town, Mark Randall sat at his desk, staring at the paperwork Megan had sent over. He had always believed in logic, order, and control, but what he had done in that courtroom had been pure instinct. And yet, he didn't regret it. He took a deep breath and opened the first document, application for prospective adoptive parents. For the first time in his life, the idea of having a family, something he had never allowed himself to consider, felt real. But first, he had to prove that he was worthy of it. And that wouldn't be easy. Judge Mark Randall had spent his entire career making decisions for others, weighing evidence, and determining the best course of action based on facts. But now, for the first time in his life, he found himself being judged. The adoption process was not designed for impulse decisions, and Randall knew that better than anyone. That's why, just days after his shocking declaration in court, he found himself sitting across from Megan Calloway in a sterile office at the Department of Child Services. "So," Megan said, clicking her pen as she studied him, "let's talk about why you want to adopt Lucas." Randall sat up straighter, his hands folded in his lap. "Because he deserves a stable home. He's been abandoned too many times, and I refuse to let it happen again." Megan tilted her head slightly. "That's a noble answer, Judge Randall. But stability isn't just about having a roof over your head. Parenting isn't just about saving a child, it's about raising them. Do you really think you're ready for that?" Randall hesitated. He had spent years in courtrooms, overseeing complex cases, guiding people through the law. But fatherhood? That was something entirely different. "I know I don't have experience as a parent," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to be a kid like Lucas." Megan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Randall exhaled slowly, shifting in his chair. "I grew up in the foster system too." Megan's expression softened. She hadn't known that. "I know what it's like to be passed around, to hear people talk about you like you're a burden. I know what it's like to feel like no one wants you," he continued. "I see myself in Lucas, and I can't let him go through what I did." Megan nodded slowly, jotting something down in her notes. "That's important," she said. "But wanting to help a child and being prepared to help a child are two different things." Randall wasn't offended. He knew this wouldn't be easy. "What do I have to do?" Megan clicked her pen again. "Well, first, you need to complete the standard evaluations. Background checks, psychological assessments, home visits. And, of course, parenting classes." Randall's eyebrows lifted. "Parenting classes?" Megan smirked. "You didn't think we'd just hand over a child to you without making sure you know how to raise one, did you?" Randall sighed, but a small smile tugged at his lips. "Fair enough." Megan closed her folder. "Lucas has been let down a lot in his life, Judge Randall. If you're serious about this, you have to prove to him that you're not just another adult making promises you can't keep." Randall met her gaze. "I intend to." That evening, Lucas sat at the foster home's kitchen table, pretending to read a book while he eavesdropped on Mrs. Davis's phone conversation. "Yeah," she was saying, her voice laced with surprise. "The judge actually applied to adopt him. Can you believe it? I don't know if it'll go through, but maybe this time, he'll finally get a real home. Lucas swallowed hard and looked down at his lap. Maybe this time. But he wasn't ready to believe it just yet. A week after Judge Randall had officially begun the adoption process, Megan Calloway arranged for him to meet with Lucas in a controlled setting. It wasn't going to be at the courthouse, where they had first met, or at the foster home, where Lucas had learned not to get too comfortable. Instead, Megan had suggested something neutral, a quiet cafe near the city park. Lucas sat at a corner table, his small hands gripping a glass of water as he anxiously glanced around the room. He wasn't sure what to expect. He had been through too many meetings like this before, with potential foster parents who asked a few polite questions before deciding he was too much work. When the bell above the door chimed, Lucas looked up and saw him, Judge Randall, except today he wasn't in a black robe, standing high above him, deciding his fate. He was just a tall man in a dark sweater and jeans, carrying a cautious but genuine smile. "Hey, Lucas," Randall said as he approached the table. Lucas sat up straighter, watching as the man pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Megan, who had been waiting at the counter, joined them with 2 cups of hot chocolate, one for Lucas, one for Randall. "I figured this would help break the ice," she said with a small smile before stepping back to give them space. Lucas stared at the cup for a moment before picking it up and taking a small sip. It was warm, sweet, and familiar, but it didn't make him feel less nervous. Randall took a sip of his own and set the cup down. "So, I know this is probably really weird for you," he said. "I mean, a judge suddenly deciding he wants to adopt you? That's not exactly normal." Lucas gave a small shrug, his eyes never leaving the cup in front of him. "Nothing about my life is normal." Randall smiled slightly at that. "Yeah, I get that." He exhaled, tapping his fingers lightly on the table before speaking again. "Look, Lucas, I'm not going to pretend I know everything about you. But I do know you've had a lot of people promise to take care of you, and then they changed their minds." Lucas's grip on his cup tightened. "I'm not them," Randall said firmly. "I don't have all the answers, and I'm probably going to mess up a lot. But I won't give up on you." Lucas finally looked up, studying the man across from him. His face didn't hold the forced smile of a social worker or the empty kindness of a foster parent trying to look good on paper. Randall looked real. "You don't even know me," Lucas said quietly. Randall nodded. "You're right. I don't. But I want to." Lucas hesitated. He had been let down too many times before. He had been told he was wanted, only to be returned like an unwanted pet. It was safer not to believe. Randall seemed to sense his hesitation. "How about this? No pressure. No promises you don't believe yet. Let's just get to know each other. We'll take it one step at a time, okay?" Lucas studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a start. The weeks that followed were a series of cautious steps forward. Judge Randall wasn't expecting instant trust. He knew that Lucas had been let down too many times before. Instead, he focused on showing up. Every few days, he would meet Lucas at the park or the cafe. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in silence, watching people walk by. Randall never pushed, never asked too many questions. He let Lucas lead the conversations, allowing the boy to decide what parts of his life he was ready to share. One afternoon, they sat on a park bench, both holding ice cream cones. It was an unusually warm day for early fall, and the park was full of families. Lucas was watching a little girl with pigtails run around with her father, giggling as he chased her. "Did you always want to be a judge?" Lucas asked suddenly, not looking at Randall. Randall licked his ice cream before answering. "Not really. I wanted to be a lawyer first. Then, over time, I realized I wanted to help people in a bigger way. Being a judge gave me that opportunity." Lucas swung his legs back and forth, his sneakers barely brushing the ground. "Do you like it?" "I do," Randall said honestly. But lately, I've been thinking about what matters outside of work. I spent a lot of years focused on my career, but I don't want that to be the only thing in my life. Lucas was quiet for a moment before asking, "Did you ever have a family?" Randall hesitated, then shook his head. "Not really. I grew up in foster care, like you." Lucas's head snapped toward him, his eyes wide with surprise. "You did?" Randall nodded. "Yeah. Different homes, different people. Some were okay. Some weren't. I learned early on not to get too comfortable anywhere." Lucas stared at him, his expression unreadable. "So why would you want to do this again? Take in a kid like me?" Randall set his ice cream down on a napkin and turned toward Lucas. "Because I know exactly what it feels like to be in your shoes. And I know how badly I wanted just one person to fight for me, to prove that I wasn't just another case file, that I actually mattered." Lucas swallowed hard, his fingers gripping the napkin in his lap. "You do matter, Lucas," Randall continued. "And I want to be that person for you." Lucas looked away, blinking rapidly. Randall didn't push. He just let the words settle. After a long moment, Lucas spoke again, his voice quieter. "You're not like the others." Randall gave him a small smile. "Good. I don't want to be." Lucas nodded slowly, licking his ice cream before it melted. He still wasn't ready to believe in forever. But for the first time, he wanted to. The adoption process moved forward slowly, each step requiring paperwork, interviews, and evaluations. Randall passed every background check without issue, but the home visits were where things became real. Lucas had never set foot in Randall's house before. It wasn't that he didn't want to, it was just easier to keep their meetings in neutral places. A house meant permanence. A house meant getting attached. And attachments always led to disappointment. But one Saturday morning, Megan picked Lucas up from the foster home and drove him across town. "You don't have to stay long," she told him gently. "Just take a look, see how it feels." Lucas stared out the window, his fingers drumming anxiously against his jeans. He had lived in 12 different houses. This one wouldn't be any different. When they pulled up to Randall's home, Lucas was surprised. He had expected something huge and intimidating, like the cold, fancy houses some foster families had. But this house was normal. Warm. A red brick home with a porch swing and a big oak tree in the yard. Randall opened the front door before they even knocked. "Hey, Lucas," he said, smiling. "Come on in." Lucas hesitated, but Megan gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a breath, he stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the smell, like coffee and old books, with a faint hint of cinnamon. It felt lived in, not staged or sterile like some of the places he'd been. Randall led him through the house, showing him the kitchen, the living room, the hallway lined with shelves of books. Then they stopped in front of a closed door. "This would be your room," Randall said, pushing it open. Lucas stepped inside cautiously. It was simple, just a bed, a desk, and an empty bookshelf. No decorations, no personal touches. Randall cleared his throat. "I didn't want to decorate it without you. I figured you should decide what you want." Lucas stared at the empty shelves. He had never had a room that felt like his before. Foster homes always had rooms that were temporary, filled with someone else's leftover furniture. Randall crossed his arms and leaned against the doorway. "No pressure, kid. You don't have to make any decisions today." Lucas nodded slowly. He didn't know what to say. After a long moment, he turned to Randall. "Can we go to the bookstore?" Randall raised an eyebrow. "Right now?" Lucas shrugged. "If I'm gonna have shelves, I should probably put something on them." Randall's lips twitched into a smile. "Sounds like a good plan to me." It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no either. The adoption was finalized on a cold December morning. Lucas sat in the courtroom, staring down at his hands as the judge, asterisk asterisk a different judge this time asterisk asterisk read through the legal documents. Randall sat beside him, calm and steady as always. He had been there every step of the way, through the home visits, the interviews, the long nights when Lucas had woken up from nightmares and found Randall sitting in the living room, reading like he had nowhere else to be. But even now, as the judge prepared to make it official, Lucas couldn't shake the fear. He had been in courtrooms before. Usually, they meant bad news. People deciding where he would go next. People explaining why he wasn't staying. His leg bounced under the table, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't look at Randall, didn't look at Megan, didn't look at the judge. Then he felt a hand rest lightly on his shoulder. Lucas glanced up. Randall didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His hand was steady, warm, unshakable. The judge cleared her throat. Mark Randall, do you fully accept the legal and personal responsibility of adopting Lucas Holt? Randall didn't hesitate. I do. Lucas swallowed hard. The judge turned to him. And Lucas, do you consent to this adoption? A long silence stretched through the courtroom. Lucas could feel everyone waiting, but his thoughts were tangled. Was this really happening? Was this another mistake? His whole life, he had been preparing for rejection. For someone to change their mind. But Randall hadn't. Not once. Lucas licked his lips. His voice was quiet, but steady. Yeah. I do. The judge smiled. Then as of today, your adoption is officially granted. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. It was done. Lucas didn't move at first. He just sat there, staring at the table, waiting for the panic, the doubt, the feeling that this wasn't real. But all he felt was Randall's hand on his shoulder. A steady presence. A father's presence. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt safe. Later that night, after the small celebration Megan had planned, Randall drove Lucas home, not to a foster house, not to another temporary placement. Home. Lucas walked inside, dropping his backpack by the door. He turned to Randall, shifting awkwardly. What do I call you now?" he asked. "Do I have to say Dad?" Randall chuckled, ruffling his hair. "You can call me whatever you want, kid." Lucas thought for a moment. Then, without really meaning to, he mumbled, "Okay. Dad." Randall's smile softened. He didn't say anything, just pulled Lucas into a quick, one-armed hug. Lucas let himself lean into it, just for a second. And for the first time in his life, he knew he wasn't going anywhere. The ending of this story is powerful because it doesn't rely on grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It finds its strength in quiet, earned moments of trust. Lucas's journey from a boy who expects rejection to a child who finally feels safe is what makes this conclusion so satisfying. It's not just about the legal adoption being finalized, it's about the emotional adoption that happens slowly, through every conversation, every moment of patience, every time Randall proves he isn't going to leave. What makes this story so compelling is that Randall isn't perfect. He's not some fairy tale rescuer swooping in to save Lucas. He's a man with his own past, his own doubts, and his own fears about whether he's capable of being a father. But instead of letting those fears hold him back, he does what no one else has done for Lucas: he stays. And Lucas, in turn, learns that love isn't just something people say, it's something they show. The final scene, where he hesitantly calls Randall Dad, isn't flashy or overly emotional, but it carries so much weight because of everything that came before it. It's a moment of quiet victory, of a boy finally realizing that he doesn't have to keep waiting for someone to leave. This isn't just a story about adoption. It's a story about healing, about breaking cycles of abandonment, and about the courage it takes to believe in something as fragile as family. It leaves us with a sense of hope, not just for Lucas, but for anyone who's ever felt unwanted, unseen, or like they don't belong. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is for someone to choose you and never let go.